You wouldn't want to meet him. It was early June 1975 when I experienced something I still struggle to explain. I wish I could meet someone who has gone through something similar. That day, as usual, I had visited my grandparents. In the evening, I got up to leave. My grandfather started looking for the key to open the old-style elevator, but I grew impatient and decided to take the stairs from the top floor. As I reached the first-floor staircase, I saw a man in a fedora standing outside the glass apartment door, staring in. I intended to walk past him and exit, but he didn't move aside. I turned to look at him, but because of the intense sunlight behind him, his face was hidden. Only his silhouette was visible. He was tall and broad-shouldered. I stepped aside, expecting him to enter so I could leave, but he remained still. I couldn't tell if he was just being rude or playing a joke, but something about him made my skin crawl. I pretended to walk away and stopped at the upper landing. I didn't want to alarm my grandfather, so I waited. The man stood there motionless for at least 10 minutes. Then he slowly opened the door and stepped inside. I watched from above as he walked like a robot towards the elevator and stood still for another 10 minutes. His outfit was strange, winter clothes in the middle of summer. His shoes were laced, resembling military boots. His hat cast a shadow over his face. I leaned forward a little more, trying to see his face, and then I froze. His eyes were hidden, but his skin was pale and smooth, like a porcelain plate. Panic set in. Just then, the man slowly raised his arm and pressed the elevator button. Finally, he's leaving, I thought. But at that exact moment, the power went out. He turned toward the stairs. I bolted up. My legs felt heavy with fear. He was catching up. In my panic, I tripped and tumbled down the stairs. I lay there, frozen, sensing him approaching. I wanted to cry. Suddenly, the power came back on. I opened my eyes. He was gone. A dog barked behind the door in front of me. From another apartment, I heard a mother and child talking. The silence from before had vanished. The next day, I visited my grandfather again. He said he had waited for me on the balcony for over half an hour, calling out, but never saw me leave. I asked if he had seen a man in a hat standing outside the door. From his spot, he could see the entrance clearly, but he swore no one had been there. For years, I kept this to myself, convincing myself it was just an overactive imagination. But many years later, I read about beings exactly like him, white-faced, robot-like figures whose arrival causes power outages. I believe that's what I encountered. It never happened again. The hitchhiker. A man was driving home late one Saturday night when he saw a young girl, about 15 or 16 years old, hitchhiking by the side of the road. He had 2 daughters of his own around the same age, so he stopped the car and pulled up beside her. "What are you doing out here all alone at this hour?" "Hitchhiking at night isn't safe," he said. The girl, dressed in a lovely, frilly dress, smiled. "It's a long story. But please, could you take me home? It's very close by. I would be forever grateful." Feeling sorry for her, the man agreed, and she got into the back seat. She gave him her address, which indeed was nearby. When they arrived, the man turned around and said, "We're here, miss." But the back seat was empty. Shocked, he jumped out of the car and knocked on the house door. A frail, elderly woman answered, looking exhausted. Before he could speak, she sighed. "Let me guess. You picked up a girl, she gave you this address, and then she vanished before you got here." The man, stunned, nodded. "You're not the first," the woman said. "Every Saturday night, it happens." She explained that many years ago, her daughter had died in a car accident after leaving a nightclub on a Saturday night. Ever since then, she had been trying to hitchhike her way home. Trembling, the man glanced at a framed photo on the piano. There she was, the same girl, in the same dress. The dead don't count. One evening, 5 university girls decided to summon a jinn. They set up everything for the ritual, and soon the jinn appeared. But in the following days, it began to torment them. No religious scholar they visited could help them. One day, an expert gave them an idea. They called the jinn again. One of the girls hid inside a closet. The plan was simple. If the jinn couldn't count how many of them were present, it had to leave them alone. When the jinn appeared, they asked, "How many of us are here?" "4," the jinn replied. The girls cheered. "Wrong. One of us is hiding in the closet." The jinn's voice turned cold. "You have doomed your friend. I will never leave." Confused, the girls asked, "What do you mean?" The jinn sneered. "The dead don't count. There are only 4 of you." Panicked, the girls flung open the closet door. Inside was their friend's headless body. From that night on, the jinn tormented them, driving each one to madness. In the end, all 4 died in an asylum under horrifying circumstances. Black, almost as if it's burned. He's growling like an animal. He repeatedly says "Eason," the call to prayer. But the shepherd doesn't understand what he means. Even though the call to prayer is happening, he keeps saying it. The shepherd contacts Erzurum again. The man on the phone says, "Until the morning prayer, keep him calm, tie him up if necessary, or they'll take him." The reason for waiting until dawn is that these entities are active between the evening prayer and the morning prayer. After the morning call, their influence lessens, and the person would start returning to normal. The shepherd keeps him by his side, praying as he takes him to a gas station. He washes his face and gives him some water. He even considers taking him to a mosque, thinking he'll be protected there. But it's impossible to get him into the mosque. So, he locks him in the car and waits outside. The gas station workers, suspicious of the situation, kick them out. Desperate, the shepherd accelerates, with the man resting in the back. Suddenly, the man opens the door and jumps out of the car, tumbling down. The shepherd stops the car, gets out, but the man is gone. The area is dark, and he can't see anything. He calls out, searching with the car's headlights, but there's no sign of the man. He calls Erzurum again, and the man on the other end says, "They've taken him, but maybe there's still time. After the morning prayer, he might survive." About half an hour later, the time for the prayer comes, and the shepherd is still waiting. As dawn breaks, he hears the man's voice calling out from a distance. He runs toward him and finds him holding a bone, inscribed with strange symbols. The man doesn't remember anything but has come back to himself. They call Erzurum again, and the man tells them, "Bring him to me." They drive to Erzurum. When they explain the situation, the man looks at the bone and panics. He immediately tells them to check their house. They do so, only to find the house is burning. The family is screaming for the child inside, but the man is frantic, wanting to go, yet they won't let him. They tell him, "If we don't fix this, worse things will happen." The names of the child and his wife are written on the bone. Luckily, the wife was outside, but the child was trapped inside. The child is rescued, but he's severely burned, and they rush him to the hospital. The man says, "You go to your child, and you, go bury the talismans before sunset, there's no time." The shepherd with the child is afraid, but agrees to go. They travel to Agri, where they are supposed to bury the talismans in certain places, either caves, ruins, or mountaintops. At every location, the shepherd loses control. He says things in an unknown language, talks to unseen figures, and cries. After burying each talisman, he returns to normal. They continue until all 7 talismans are buried. They drink the water the man gave them and head back. The child's condition is bad but improves over time. The house is completely destroyed, with the cows and the barn burned to the ground. If they hadn't buried the talismans, none of them would have survived. The man explained that the talismans contained a call for help. But who were they asking help from? At each of the 7 locations, they communicated with 7 tribes, asking for protection. If all 7 tribes agreed, the entity would leave them alone. But if even one talisman were lost or misplaced, the protection would break, and the entity would return, even after 100 years. The shepherds finally rid themselves of the curse after completing the task. The fortune teller. It happened in the summer of 1999. At the time, I was working at the bar of a hotel in Erdek. Since I worked late into the night, I would wake up around noon. One day, after another long night at work, I woke up around 4 p.m. and went to the small diner across from the hotel where I usually ate. There, I ran into one of the hotel security guards, and we sat at a table together. As we ate, someone approached from behind me and said, "Would you like me to read your fortune?" At first, I thought they were talking to someone else, so I kept eating my toast. But then, the voice, which I now recognized as a woman's, repeated the same question. "Would you like me to read your fortune?" Unable to ignore it any longer, I turned around. Expecting to see a stereotypical fortune teller, I turned quickly and somewhat annoyed, partly because I had never believed in fortune telling. My eyes met hers, and before I could say anything, she asked again, "Would you like me to read your fortune?" I snapped out of my confusion and quickly replied, "No," before turning back around. Then, I heard my security guard friend say, "Read mine instead." I say heard because those 3 to 5 seconds felt like they hadn't even happened. My friend grabbed my arm, insisting that I should let her read mine too, saying he'd pay for it. I don't know why, but I nodded in agreement, as if doing so would somehow bring me relief. At that moment, the fortune teller turned to my friend and said, "I won't read yours." Then she moved closer to me, towering over me like a guardian of some unknown realm. I asked her what she wanted. Was it money? She responded coldly, "I will read your fortune." I laughed slightly, treating it like a joke, and asked why. Her expression remained lifeless as she answered, "Because you just asked me to." A shiver ran down my spine. For some reason, the woman who had initially unsettled me now seemed oddly fascinating. The thought, "Why not? What do I have to lose?" crossed my mind, the most dangerous kind of thought. "All right," I said. Without hesitation, she sat beside me, lowered her head, and told me to extend my right hand. A mischievous thought crossed my mind. I wanted to test her by offering my left hand instead. But before I could act, her voice cut through the air like a blade. "Don't even think about playing games by giving me the wrong hand." At that moment, I felt completely paralyzed. I wanted to leave, but my body refused to move. It was as if my feet were nailed to the ground. Trembling, I extended my right hand. The woman took out a cloth, squeezed some liquid onto my palm, then pressed my right hand shut.